morning, everyone, and today is the day. It is Randy Ribay's event here in Manila and his launch for his book, Patron Saints of Nothing, and we, Bookworms Unite PH, are hosting it, and I'm just headed out the door to go pick up Randy, and I'm kind of freaking out. I hope everything goes well. Pray for our souls. It's gonna be a great day, I'm sure of it. Keeping it positive. I'm word vomiting because I'm quite nervous. I will see you guys in a bit.
First of all, thank you all for your enthusiasm for this book and for this event. Thank you because we're, as you can see, we're full house now, so yay! The BU team really believes in Randy and the work he has done with Patron Saints of Nothing. Not only is it an incredible addition to a list of YAs that's increasingly becoming more reflective of the diverse world we live in, but it also, we believe, shines a spotlight on a topic that is frequently being shied away from the media, specifically for us Filipinos and for the Filipino-Americans. So, again, welcome, make yourself comfortable, and please enjoy the conversation.
Okay, so I just want to say thank you all for coming, so thank you for my family, who's mostly like taking up this half of the room. Who doesn't know me. It's still amazing to me that people who don't know me actually buy the book or read the book. So that's pretty incredible. And thank you for Bookworms United for organizing it, especially last minute. I had to change the date pretty quickly, and that's why when they're like, oh, we only announced it 2 weeks ago, that's my fault, not theirs. And I appreciate the accommodating rescheduling of that. So thank you all for coming. I hope.
Hi everyone, I'm Salva and I'll be moderating our conversation with Randy today. First, wanted to start off with asking, so in an interview you said that your book was for anyone who felt like they were more than one thing or who considers themselves more than one thing, and your dedication in fact said it was for the hyphenated. So can you expound on that a little?
The dedication for the hyphenated comes first of all from the primary audience of the story is Filipino-Americans. When I was growing up, I didn't read anything by any Filipino-American writers until I got to college. So first and foremost, I wanted it to be a story for people who were like me that never saw themselves in the page. There are a lot of us in the United States, but we're very underrepresented when it comes to movies, TV shows, and books. So first of all, kind of that dedication to Filipino-Americans and that hyphenated identity, which is something that's very, very unique, I think. It can be confusing.
Yeah.
Because you have a foot in both of these worlds, but at the same time, a lot of times you might not feel like you belong fully in either world, right? When I was growing up in America, one of the questions I got all the time, I don't know, my sister's here, so maybe she can speak to this too, was what are you? What are you? I got that a lot growing up from classmates, from adults, from coaches. What are you? And it wasn't bad intention, right? It was a curiosity.
Yeah.
But people have this tendency, I think, to try to put you into a box, right? What are you? Which box can I put you into? And so visually, it's kind of just this reminder that I couldn't be placed very easily, right? And that always kind of made me feel not fully American. And then at the same time, when I come here to visit the Philippines, you know, I don't speak Tagalog very well. Kaunti lang. And there's, of course, a lot of customs and stuff I'm not familiar with just because I grew up primarily in the United States. And so it's kind of like this really cool thing to kind of be part of these different worlds, kind of have this multiple perspective, which I think is a gift. But at the same time, it can be a very limiting thing. It kind of create a lot of discomfort, a lot of kind of insecurity. And so creating a story that kind of spoke to that and leaned into that, in which the character was trying to understand what does that mean? What does it mean to be from two different places? And it's the kind of story that I wish I had growing up, and I hope it's kind of meaningful for others who are kind of like me growing up and not really getting that representation. And I think beyond that, I put it to the hyphenated in general and not specifically to Filipino-Americans, because I think that's a feeling that a lot of people can relate to. Not just Filipino-Americans, but just that idea of being more than one thing, kind of being part of multiple worlds, and kind of what that means. And then finally, also the idea of humanizing the victims of the drug war. A lot of times viewed as simply victims or viewed as criminals or pushers or whatever it is, and trying to bring some humanity to that and trying to show just, none of us are one thing, despite that tendency to try to put people in these boxes, that a lot of us have these different sides of ourselves, trying to embrace that in that story, kind of figure out what does that mean.
So going off of a book centered around the Philippine drug war, your book incorporated a lot of Filipino lifestyle and culture and facets of the Philippine government and the administration. So can you give us a little background on the research process and how long it took for you to look up everything and to inquire about things that you're right? The book.
In terms of the research with the lifestyle cultural stuff, a lot of that's coming from my own experiences or my own memories. A lot of what you read in the story is plucked from my own memory, including that opening scene, unfortunately. And so I had a certain amount of familiarity with some of that cultural stuff. In terms of the drug war, a lot of it was, first of all, research. Just what could I do? What could I find out online? Articles, videos, trying to actively read both from sources that are Filipino and sources that are international, different perspectives. And at the same time, also trying to read sources that are kind of macro, right? Kind of looking at the statistics of the situation, the historical context, and then also looking at micro sources, so stories that tell individual stories of people impacted by the drug war. And so that was kind of like stage one. And I was also able to visit the country a couple times while I was working on the book. The first time, unfortunately, was for my Lolo's funeral a couple years ago. So I came back when I started writing this book. So when you read it and you're like, wow, this is really depressing. A lot of that comes from the place of when I was grieving my Lolo when I came back for that funeral. And then I came back again towards the end of the writing, before my final revisions. And visited a lot of the places that I mentioned in the story just to do fact checking and making sure that what I talked about actually was accurate to the extent possible. And I'm sure there's probably still some mistakes, but trying to do the best that I could to represent things accurately. And I also had some sensitivity readers. For those of you unfamiliar, sensitivity reader is somebody who has the lived experience. So in this case, I had people who were Filipino read it. Was one of them. Dad was another one. Where's my dad? There he is. As well as a few other people too, just to kind of read it and kind of make sure that I was portraying things accurately as possible from a cultural perspective. In the same way you might have a story with a doctor. Yeah. You might have a doctor read it to make sure that that's accurate. So.
What about your own experience as a Filipino American? Jay, the protagonist of Patron Saints of Nothing, is also Filipino American. So what are the differences and similarities that you incorporated in his character?
First and foremost, let me say that when I write, I kind of feel like Voldemort a little bit. This is less evil than it sounds, though. And that Voldemort puts pieces of himself in the Horcruxes. And so people always ask about Jay, but there are pieces of me in every character that I write. I think that's the only way to make them feel realistic, even Tito Manning in the story. But with Jay specifically, we share a lot of stuff superficially in terms of I was born in the Philippines, but I grew up primarily in the United States. Jay's family on the superficial level, so don't read into this anymore over here. From Bicol, from Cavite, and so kind of making those references. Jay has a brother and a sister. I have an older brother and sister. Fun fact, I let them pick their fictional jobs. Oh. So when you're reading the brother did this, my brother, I asked him, well, what fictional job do you want? He chose something I'd never heard of before. It was a subsea engineer.
That was a cool job.
Yeah. And so all that's in there, but to me, the core of the story is kind of what comes from me the most. I already spoke a little bit about being Filipino and American, and so a lot of the story came out of the idea of reading about the drug war and wondering, what right do I have to give my opinion on it, or to speak out, or to write about it? And so I created Jay, who eventually has to confront that question. Because when he gets the news of his cousin's death as a result of the drug war, it's no longer this abstract, vague thing happening on the other side of the world. It becomes a very personal thing. So from a plot perspective, that forces him to figure out what does this mean to him in relation to who he is. And a lot of what he is working on in that story was stuff that I've worked out over the course of my life at various points. The big difference is I wasn't really figuring out a lot of that stuff out until probably a couple years into college. In high school, I was just worrying about standardized tests and sports and girls to some extent. Wife, don't listen to that part. And I wasn't really thinking about these things, even though I think I subconsciously was feeling them and dealing with them, and they were kind of resulting in these insecurities. I wasn't confronting them. So I wanted to put Jay in a position where he has to confront that identity at the same time he's confronting, not just something vague and abstract like identity, but at a practical level, how do I react to, what do I deal, what do I think about what happens to my cousin?
So Jay's big moment where he decides, I have to listen to what is going on in the country after returning home, was his cousin's death. For you, was there a moment in time when you woke up and were like, this is what I'm writing about?
I don't think there was an exact moment where I started thinking about that. When I choose what I want to write about, it's usually something that I just keep thinking about, and it doesn't go away. It's, a lot of times people are like, where do you get your ideas? Where do you get your ideas as a writer? And the ideas are the really easy part. I can come up with a million ideas. The hard part is you pick one of them and you're going to be writing about it for the next several years if you want it to become an actual book. So for me, it's like I just kept thinking about this. And it's a little scary to deal with this topic. It's also a little scary to deal with a very personal issue, just in terms of the identity piece, which is not something that I've written about in depth before. And so makes you feel very vulnerable, putting a lot of myself out onto the page when I write the story. Yeah, but I don't remember a particular single moment. It was just kind of like seeing the headlines, reading about it, and just continuing to think about it, continuing to be bothered by it, as well as what place I have to say anything about it.
Talking about your writing, if you could tell your younger writer self when you were just starting out 3 pieces of advice, what would they be?
The first piece of advice would be to actually write. So there's this idea of I want to be a writer, and it sounds very fantastic and poetic, whatever. You gotta do the work, right? I think to a large extent when I was growing up, I kind of thought of artists as people who were born with that natural talent, right? When that's not the case at all. It's a skill like anything else, and you work at it and you practice and you get better at it. We don't expect somebody to bust out of the womb, be a really good basketball player, right? You expect them to put in the hours, hundreds or thousands of hours to practice it. It's the same kind of thing with writing. You got to do it. You got to practice it. The second piece of advice I would offer would be to finish things. It's very easy to write and start a million stories, but finishing it all the way through. The first book that I wrote all the way through, I don't know if anybody read it in here, maybe not. You read it, yeah. It was terrible, so bless you, wife. It was a young adult zombie apocalypse novel. In my defense, it was before The Walking Dead was really popular, so it was kind of
you were ahead of the curve.
I was ahead of the curve. But my writing, unfortunately, was not. But writing it to the end and working with and trying to revise it, it's just it gives you the idea that, yes, you can do this. It's not this insurmountable thing, writing a novel, right? That it's possible to do. And then also just the practice. Every word you put in, whether it gets published or not, whether anything happens with it or not, every word you write, every sentence you write is making you better, right? It's strengthening. That's practice. Read a lot and read widely. Read all different kinds of genres that interest you. What we produce, just like with food. This might be a little graphic. What you produce is kind of a product of what you take in, right? If you take in corn, you're going to see corn. And so it's the same thing, I think, with the art that we create. If you read all of one type of thing, what you produce is going to be just I don't want to curse because there are little kids here, it's going to be a poopier version of that thing, right? But if you're reading all over the place, you're reading all these different genres, what you produce is going to be, hollow of those genres. I don't know if I used that correctly, but I just wanted to use something that sound somewhat Filipino. I write mostly contemporary, realistic, but I read a lot of fantasy, I read sci-fi, I play a lot of video games, I read a lot of comics. I think it's kind of helpful to see what other people are doing. I read a lot of poetry, or I try to, because poetry, I heard somebody say once, I think Rebecca Solnitz, maybe, I will keep looking at my wife because she was there a lot of times. He said like poetry reminds her what language can do, right? Just the inventiveness of language and the space of how you can use it in unique and different ways.
Funny thing you brought up video games because that is actually one of the questions here. And on a lighter note, Jay is a big video gamer, and there were a lot of references in the book. Could you tell us some of your favorite video games?
So I was blessed, I think, in that I grew up in the dawn of the video game age. And so I grew up, well, maybe not like the dawn, but like pretty close to the beginning, right? So like the original Nintendo and all that, Oregon Trail on the computer and all of that.
Yeah.
So the first, I could talk about a lot of video games, but I was going to save you guys some time. The first video game that I really remember loving, and like loving the story of it, kind of feeling like, oh, this game can be more than just entertainment, was Final Fantasy VII.
There's a remake.
Oh, I had to pre-order for like 2 years ago. So they're remaking it, and I'm really excited like, for a new generation, because now like when I talk to teenagers, I'm like, Final Fantasy VII, they're like, what? Isn't Final Fantasy at like 16 now or something? So that was the first time where I really remember the story of the game kind of capturing me and showing me what a video game could do. Outside of that, I like a lot of like role-playing games, like very story-based, like Chrono Trigger, Shining Force on Sega Genesis. I don't know if you guys know what it is. Wow, that made me feel old. All right. More recently, like The Last of Us and Life is Strange. Our first season of The Walking Dead Telltale game is very good. The one that's referenced early in the story is Horizon Zero Dawn.
Yes!
That's another thing. Like I think you can look at what video games are doing, and I think in terms of narrative and where stories are going, video games are very fascinating because when they first started out, it was pretty simplistic and pretty, and the developers were writing the stories and they weren't very good stories. But then now you're seeing more video game developers employing writers to write the stories, and you're seeing the form, I think, evolve right now and become something better than what it was before.
How has being a teacher of young adults informed your writing for life?
I think at the foremost, it helps me respect teenagers. I think for people who don't work with teenagers a lot, there's this tendency to be like, oh, teenagers, all they do is roll their eyes and like go on their phones, and they might do those things. But being a teacher, I see much more to them than that. And even if you're a parent of a teenager, you might think that they just roll their eyes and like don't listen to you. But in my classes, which are very discussion-based, we're reading and talking about very heavy, very complex issues, and I'm hearing them talk about these things and process these things in a way that just kind of blows my mind sometimes with how intelligent they are, how different they are, at the same time like how similar they are sometimes. I've been teaching now for about 13 years, so even in those 13 years, kind of seeing, because of social media, I think teenagers being more woke and more aware of what's happening in the world than ever before. And so I think I get a lot of that from being a teacher, just appreciating that and understanding that. And one of my least favorite criticisms is when people are like, oh, this character sounds too smart to be a teenager. Yeah. And it's like, you clearly have not talked to any teenagers meaningfully. Teenagers can be very, very intelligent. Yes, they can also roll their eyes and play video games. They're talking about hyphenated, but
they know more than they're letting on. Unfortunately, most Filipino youth nowadays are still apathetic when it comes to these socio-political issues, and most of them use the excuse that, oh, it doesn't affect me directly, so I'm not going to bother about it, I'm not going to worry about it. What do you think would be the easiest discourse in engaging them in these sorts of topics?
So that's a great question with no easy answer. The easiest, I don't think there's an easy way to do it. And I certainly don't know the answer. I don't know an easy answer. I don't know the answer either. I don't think there's one. As a storyteller, I think what I can do is put the stories out there. getting them to think about it, getting them to read about it and learn about it, ask questions about it in ways that are going to open up and engage them with that topic, right? I love stories because I think stories are interesting entry point into some of those topics because it does humanize the abstract rather than just being a number or a headline. It makes it human, and I think we are built to connect with each other. I think that's the beautiful thing about stories, is that they build those connections. So as you know, my position as a writer, I think, is to put stories that people can connect to and try to build empathy. It's happening a lot with social media. I think the trap is, how do we get kids to engage meaningfully with these topics?
Yeah.
It's very easy to click retweet or favorite on something that's very, activist based. But I think it's like, how do we get them to the next level? How do we get them to engage with that? And how do we get them to understand that I think real meaningful change is not slow, not sudden and immediate, right? It's slow, it takes time, and it's difficult. And there are going to be backward steps along that path to progress. I think that's a difficult lesson, especially in today, and this is going to make me sound old again, but in today's society, when I can Instagram a picture of like my food, and I'm like, how many people favorited it? Like 5 minutes later, right?
Yeah.
Like we expect this immediate response. And I think with these larger social issues, they are complex. And so the solutions are going to be complex. They're going to take time, they're going to take deep involvement, continuous involvement, they're going to take resilience. And so I think, again, as an author, putting stories out there that help them see that. Like, I very consciously did not want to write a book where, wow, Jay goes to the Philippines and fixes everything, right? That's, if you're expecting that, that's not the arc of the story, unfortunately, sorry. It's more Jay goes in and realizes he needs to learn. He's positioned as the learner. He's called out on his tendencies to want to be a savior. And so I think that's what I'm trying to do in the story, is kind of show kids that you do need to learn first. You need that humility of understanding that you don't know everything going into that situation.
In recent years, there's been a push for more diverse books to be published, and although there has been an improvement, there's still a disconnect between which books get published and who gets to tell which stories. So where do you think that the publishing industry goes from here?
Long story short, I can't speak to like the Philippines, but in the United States, there's a disconnect between what the United States actually looks like demographically, in terms of race, in terms of socioeconomic class, in terms of sexuality, and whose stories are making it onto the shelves. If you love books, getting people to understand that there's more than just being a writer, right? A lot of times you think, oh, I love stories, I need to be a writer. And that might be the case, but there's also like all these other wonderful people working behind the scenes, and we need that passion, we need that diversity behind the scenes as much as we need it on the page, or else what's on the page is not going to get onto the shelf, right? It's not going to get into the hands of students or academics.
So Patron Saints of Nothing is a diverse story that deals with grief and loss and how to move on from that. And now that it's finally out in the world, it was published last Tuesday, I believe. It was their release date. What is one takeaway you would want your readers, and specifically your Filipino readers, to take away from this story?
So I'm going to answer this question in multiple parts.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go for it.
I'm always about the multiple parts. So there's a librarian who in 1990, Rudine Sims Bishop, wrote about mirrors and windows, sliding glass doors. Kind of the idea that we need to see ourselves in literature, right? Mirrors. We also need to see others, windows. And sliding glass doors are kind of windows that we can kind of walk through and connect with. And to grow up healthily, a child needs to have both of those. If they don't have mirrors, then their experience is not validated. And they think that they might be alone in the world, right? Or they might be weird or different or other. And if they only have mirrors, then they think they are all that matters in the world, right? So they also need that other experience. So for Filipino Americans and maybe Filipinos, I hope they can see some of themselves. They can feel seen. They can feel like this is a mirror. That, like I said, I did not have that growing up, and I want people to have that now. And then for non-Filipinos, non-Filipino Americans, I hope that can serve as a window. Here is this experience of a Filipino-American person and kind of struggling with this issue of identity and the drug war and all of this. So I hope they can learn a little bit about the Philippines. I hope they can gain some empathy with both the Filipino-American experience as well as what's happening with the drug war. And kind of for everyone, I think my big thing is empathy. To me, reading fiction is an exercise in empathy, right? By its nature, you are stepping out of yourself and into someone else's story. Even more so than you are with movies or video games, because it's language. There's nothing more direct than language. And so I'm hoping that by stepping into the story, they walk away with more empathy for whatever else it is. And I'm also kind of the opinion that people are going to take away what they take away from it, and I don't want them to be restricted by what I want them to take away from it. Readers will always bring that in, take away what they'll take away from it, and that's just as valuable as what I want them to take away.
I think now we're going to open the floor to questions from the audience.
Certainly. I grew up Roman Catholic and going to Catholic Church and Catechism and all of that. I don't think I ever finished it fully. And so to me that is a big part of Filipino culture. And the title itself obviously a reference to the patron saints of the Catholic Church, but also I wanted to twist that a little bit, right? And kind of this idea, the of nothing might be surprising. And I don't want to talk too much about it because I feel like I do want you to read it and like think about that title. There is a very intentional kind of reference to Catholicism. Because the book also has to do a lot with faith and what that means. One of the uncles in the story is a priest, and the main character ends up talking to him at some point and kind of engaging with this topic as well. So in the first stage, I get to send them kind of what they call comp titles, or like comparison covers that I like, that I think would kind of fit the ethos of the story. And so that's the first stage. And then Penguin commissioned an artist from, I think, Portugal, and he kind of worked with that and came up with this. And then from there, it was just kind of like some fine-tuning input on my part. I love the cover. As an author, sometimes you don't get a whole lot of choice in the cover, and so it's nice to get a cover that I fully embrace. And there was a time where if the character was non-white, they would not put them on the cover because they didn't think that would sell very well. And I'm happy to see that this is just part of a trend that more characters of color are being featured prominently on book covers. I never saw a book cover with Filipino-American teen growing up. This is the first time that I saw it when I saw that cover design. So I love that the Philippine sun was there. I love that the character is there front and center, not like silhouetted, not taken out of the picture. First, let me back up and say, I think everything is political. If you engage with the topic, it's political, we call it political, but I think if you choose to ignore that topic, it's also a political choice, right? You're choosing to not engage with it. If I write a story about modern Philippines, that's a major thing that's in the headlines a lot, people are talking about it a lot. That's a political choice on my part, or it's a political privilege to not talk about it. I do wish we stopped labeling things as political because I think that differentiates, and I think everything is political. But with that said, I think there's always a fear it's not going to get out there. With this one, I kind of understood going into it that was a possibility. And one of the nice things about the book being out is that it's going to do what it's going to do at this point, right? For me, leading up to the book release is way more anxiety-driven because I'm always wondering what should I be doing to promote it or talk about it. But once it's out, it's going to live its own life. I feel like a mama bird. And sometimes the exact opposite can happen. Something very political can catch fire and reach a lot more people, right? Sometimes they say the best thing you can do for a book sale is ban the book. Because then everyone starts reading it and they want to say, why is this banned? And so I don't know what's going to happen with it. That fear is there, but what will be it's out of my control at this point. So the short answer is yes. I do know there are Filipino authors who have US-based agents and US-based publishing deals that are then distributed internationally. So I know at a practical level that is possible. I think it is important for those stories to also be out there, right? Like I would love to see a YA book from a Filipino perspective, engaging with the topic of the drug war. At the basic level, it is possible to get published internationally. I think right now is a very good time to do it. A lot of publishers, a lot of agents are hungry for those different perspectives and those perspectives that have been historically decentralized. And so, yeah, so I wanted to say, yes, I think it is possible, and I think the world needs it. I've been expecting it, and so I haven't gotten anything too bad yet. I don't know if it's because the books just came out recently. I don't know if it's because people just aren't reading it, and that's a possibility. Just like nobody reads it, and okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess I would have to cross that bridge when I get to it, but to an extent, I think I'm privileged in telling this story as an American citizen, because I realize there is a level of safety behind that. It's not completely safe, but I acknowledge that there's a privilege in me not having to worry about my safety as much as if I were a Filipino citizen writing that story, putting that story out there. With that said, I do try to take what precautions I can, such as just like securing my social media and that kind of stuff. And I'll be quick with the mute button or the block button if need be. But I think for the most part, I'm expecting it, so we'll see. My big thing with teaching literature specifically is how do you get the kids to talk about it in a meaningful way? So not teaching them what to think about it, but how do you get them to think about it? How do you teach them to have productive, respectful conversations? Because I think, if you teach someone, if you just tell them, here's what you should think about it, it just goes away, right? But if they're thinking about it and they arrive at it themselves, it's going to be a lot more meaningful. They're going to remember it a lot better. So I think about it a lot. Sorry, I'm going to get super educationally here. Something I've started doing in my own teaching is I teach literary theory now. So I teach, feminist theory, Marxist literary theory, all these different literary theories as lenses, as ways to look at literature and evaluate it with other books, with books that I teach. I like teaching those and teaching kids to evaluate and talk about the books using these theoretical ideas, lenses of looking at it. And yes, very conscious, young adult is what I write generally. It's what interests me because I feel like it's the age at which we become who we are for the rest of our lives. And I think that's interesting to me is how do we become this way? I like writing stories about characters who are trying to figure themselves out as they move away from their families and become their own person and figure out who they are. What does it mean to be a Filipino American? What does it mean to be a male in our society? What does it mean to be middle class in society? So those are always interesting questions for me as an adult too, kind of looking back and reflecting on how did I become who I am? Am I happy with that? Right? Being intentional about the way I live my life. And I think stories can help us think through that and figure that out. I think even as, I was just telling this with my wife, but I wanted to write something about the value of young adult literature for adults. A lot of times you'll get these takes every now and then where somebody's like, if you're an adult, you shouldn't be reading young adult literature. And then the response to support it is usually, people can read what they want. And it's good now, right? Young adult literature is better than it used to be. And I agree with those two statements, but I think the third thing to it is that there is value in reading it as an adult. So when you read about a teenager figuring out who they are, what that means, it gives you the space to think through that as well. And I think a lot of us maybe weren't conscious of that as we became a teenager. Maybe it's kind of giving us that space to think through that. And so I think there's, I write young adults because I really love that time of life. I really love those stories. I'm really interested in those stories. Certainly, I think so. It always feels strange to me to be congratulated on the book, knowing that it's a story based on the deaths of thousands of people, knowing that this is ongoing. It's, people are like, congratulations, your book's out today, right? Like, as the writer, I have to be like, oh, thank you, but it's always kind of strange to me. So I do try to, I guess, put other information out there. Like, if you look at the back of the book, there's a reading list, there's a brief author's note to acknowledge that. When I can, I try to plug organizations like Rise Up for Life and for Rights here in the Philippines, who works with the families of victims of the drug war. I'm working on something else now. It's actually like, I'm not going to say too much about it, but it's actually a genre switch for me. Still young adult, but it's a different genre. Again, not to say too much about it, but it does factor in. There is Filipino-ness is still a thing that is playing into it. I've never liked being put in a box, if you can't tell yet. And so I also don't want to be the person that like just writes these controversial issues, right? I want to have the freedom as an artist to kind of write what I'm interested in pursuing, what I'm interested in thinking about exploring. I do feel this weight of history of the current situation that kind of weighs on me, even as I continue to talk about the book or continue to tweet about it or whatever.
Right now we can proceed to the signing.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So thank you for answering all our questions. Hello everyone, so I just got home a couple hours ago and I completely forgot to wrap this whole thing up. I was so dead tired. We did a lot of back and forth in Manila today, but I wouldn't have traded in for anything. It was such an amazing day today, such an amazing experience for us as a book community here in the Philippines and as an organization, Bookworms Unite. This was our first book launch ever. It was personally my first time moderating and it was such an amazing experience. And Yale just phrased it perfectly. There was no other perfect author to have all these firsts with other than Randy, and we're so grateful that he took the time out of his trip to spend a day with us readers. Now we're all just pooped but it's a good kind of pooped. We're all like tired, but we had the time of our lives, and I forgot to film this sort of conclusion video. I was already in bed, hence the pajamas, hence the messy hair, hence the smudged makeup, but I just wanted to wrap this whole vlog up. So thank you to everyone for coming, and hopefully we'll be able to do more of these events soon in the future. Thank you to Tweedle for housing us once again for the 3rd year in a row. Thank you to Penguin Random House. Thank you especially to Miss Honey and to everyone else who helped us put this event together. We are so grateful. And that about does it for this vlog on Randy Ribay's visit here to Manila. Oh my gosh, I'm running out of battery. You can follow me on my other bookish adventures on Twitter and Instagram. On Twitter at Cuckoo for Books, on Instagram at Cuckoo for Books, and at Salva Villarreal. So please subscribe and I will see you guys very soon. Don't die on me, battery. Bye guys.